All right, witnesses in opposition to this request for parole, Mr. Vargo, I will let you speak first.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. I don't want to take too much time away from the family, and I will say this. I agree with Mr. Cruz that the question here is change. Because somebody who is a model inmate is not necessarily a model citizen. And what we have seen throughout the parole process mirrors what we saw throughout the criminal process, the appellate process, and the habeas process. A consistent fictional story by Jack Ramos of what he did, why he did it, and a failure to come to grips, not just with the loss that he caused, that he does at least articulate that he understands that, but more particularly the reasons that he caused it. And what I find striking is that from the very beginning, the family has said that if Mr. Ramos ever came to grips with what he really did, that they would support his request for parole. I have worked with this family now for over 25 years. And while their anger has changed over time, they have consistently said that the major thing that they can't come to grips with is that he will not acknowledge what it is that he did. We are still, to this day, hearing the same lies that he told around the case and at sentencing, that he was out there on his white horse trying to save the children from John Gibbon. And he was only going out with an unloaded pistol to scare John into giving the children back. Children, of course, who were behind him in the house. We have heard over and over that the gun just went off, but even his lawyer's own brief to the South Dakota Supreme Court refers to him hitting Debbie with the gun. If that's not a pistol whipping, I don't know what is. He was not protecting the children. Debbie was bent over at the waist. A hank of her hair had been ripped out of her head by him. This wasn't pushing past her to get to somebody that was causing a threat. This was Jack Ramos embarrassed, humiliated, unmanned by the fact that John Gibbon had gotten the physical best of him, and he was going to go show him something. And if Debbie Jo Martinez had not been our victim, John Gibbon very well likely would have been. And what I find striking is that he has never come to grips with that fact. What we have seen is how little he has truly changed by the reactions when he doesn't get what he wants. We saw it initially at, as I said, at in the criminal matter, but we also saw it on the appeal. If you read the appellate brief filed by his lawyer, it is full of his accusations about what horrible human beings Debbie was, what a horrible human being Angela was, what a horrible human being Brenda was, and that they were not just there, they were possessive, that they wanted Jack back, and that they were lashing out at him on that basis. And so he lashed out in the appeal. On the habeas, he lashed out at his lawyers. He also lashed out at me, saying that I had promised him something he didn't get at in terms of a plea agreement, a claim that the South Dakota Supreme Court roundly rejected. And now on parole, when he isn't getting what he wants, he sends his lawyer out to say, well, you should tell Mr. Vargo and Senator Rounds to shut up. We don't want to hear from them because they're not hearing the things we want to hear. And it really comes back for me to his very first parole hearing, when Debbie's mom was up there and said flat out, just tell the truth and I'll support you. And he stood up so violently that his chair flew back from behind him and he demanded to be removed from the room. That wasn't discomfort. That wasn't his I am not worthy feeling. That was anger. And that's why I believe that this model inmate will not be a model citizen. In the most important half hour of his life, he couldn't constrain his temper when somebody was saying something he did not want to hear. And I pity the woman who was the target of that the first time he is on the outside. If you read the sentencing transcript and you hear the history of domestic violence, and then you watch his reactions to these parole hearings across the board, what he has sent his lawyers out to do at every step of the way. Jack Ramos is one of two things. He is either at your throat or he is at your feet. In prison, he's at your feet, and he's a model inmate. In the real world, I doubt that that would be the case. I would ask you not to grant him commutation, to grant him access to the full board.
Thank you, Mr. Vargo. Mr. Vargo, I'd like to give you a chance to explain what potentially is the discrepancy between the letter you wrote to defense counsel indicating that you didn't doubt that this killing was accidental, as opposed to your subsequent comments.
I'd like to point out that the quote as to it being accidental is the only one that the defense has used, and it is the ultimate in being wrenched out of context. I will read you from that exact plea letter.
No need to. I read the whole thing. I read it again and again.
While I believe that he did not intend to shoot or kill Debbie, I believe that it was not a mere accident or a simple accident, because he made a series of decisions, starting with alcohol, going to the firearm, his intention to assault, which would be a felony assault on Mr. Gibbon with the gun, and then his striking Debbie Jo Martinez with the gun after he had grabbed her by the hair so violently that her hair came out. That all was not accidental. And so I wanted to acknowledge that I did not believe that this was a first-degree murder. I wanted to acknowledge that this was not, he did not set out at that moment even to cause her death, but his actions, which were very deliberate, not accidental, are the things that then accidentally led to her death. And all of that is in the same letter. His attorneys were not at issue. His attorneys complained of it to the court, and he was given a chance to withdraw his plea. So if we're talking about not relitigating matters, the South Dakota Supreme Court found that there was no misconduct and no misleading in either my comments then. And I have been consistent for the last 25 years, from sentencing to every parole hearing, in my approach to Mr. Ramos. I told the family before the very first one that the one thing that I didn't know what to do, or why I wouldn't know what to do, is if he came in and he truly had changed and he was willing to say what he did. That has not yet been the case.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vargo. Kyle Chase?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm here in my capacity as counsel to Senator Mike Rounds, former Governor Rounds. As we all know, he made this decision to grant a commutation of sentence at a time when he did not have all the information he would have normally considered in making this decision process. As the previous person who just testified noted, the notification was not sent to the family members that would have been instrumental in how former Governor Mike Rounds would have come to a decision in this matter. And so since we've had parole hearings, since they've been requested, Mike Rounds has felt it to be important that he participate in the parole hearing to convey his position that had he had the information regarding the family's preference in this decision-making process, he would have came to a different result in regards to this decision. And so a letter has been submitted by Senator Mike Rounds for the parole board's consideration. Everything I've just said is just a summation of what that letter says. Again, based upon Senator Rounds' position and how he views how this decision was made, he would not be supportive of Mr. Ramos being granted parole. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for you. So
yeah.
what we're being told essentially is that then Governor Rounds had on one side a gentleman in prison who has at least ostensibly done many good things while he's been incarcerated, and that was balanced against a blank slate on the side of the victims. Is that fair to summarize what then Governor Rounds was looking at with that commutation?
I will say that the information that has been provided to me by Senator Rounds is that the notifications that were to be sent to the family members affected by this decision-making process were not delivered And so they did not have an opportunity to factor into then Governor Round's decision-making process.
So what, if you know, what efforts did then Governor Rounds or his staff make to reach out to victims prior to making his commutation decision?
I would not feel comfortable answering that question, as I was not in the position at that time to be aware of the extra efforts that staff had made. But I would be happy to do some research for you and provide an answer to the parole board if that is appropriate.
If this does go to the full parole board, you may want to be prepared to do that.
Understood.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Barron, do you want to give any, I'd be willing to give you about a minute or so for final comments if you choose to make them.
It's my understanding in the application for commutation, notice was sent to the Pennington County State's Attorney. There wasn't a failure of notice, there was a failure to respond to the notice. And I did have a phone conversation with Mark Vargo last summer, and he conceded that the notice that went to the Pennington County State's Attorney's office wasn't responded to. So there was never an intentional effort to avoid, to give a wrong address or to not give notice to the family. And I know that Mr. Ramos has walked a delicate line because he's not supposed to communicate with the victims of the crime, but he's done everything within his power to communicate with them through proper channels to express his sorrow. And when I got involved in the case, the very first thing he said to me, he still wants the opportunity to meet with the family and let him apologize to them. Not in the context of a parole hearing, but in the context of one-on-one presentation. So those are my closing comments.
All right, thank you, Mr. Barron. All right, this concludes the hearing. Mr. Vargo, would you like to give one final comment as well?
I will say that what I told Mr. Barron was simply that I have no idea what was done by the State's Attorney's Office, and I can't disprove that they simply failed to respond. I was not here at that time.
Understood.
The idea that I said they got notice and did not respond, that is also not true. And there appears to be, I will just leave it that I believe that the tactics that are still being used are the same ones that Mr. Ramos was using 25 years ago.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Vargo.